Mix It With Mike plugin of the week comes from SoundRadix. It's Auto Align 2. This is an update to the very popular Auto Align plugin. This is a great plugin for phase aligning your audio tracks together. This is especially useful for drums, but it can also be used for things like DI and a bass amp, two acoustic guitar mics in some configuration, multiple piano mics, etc. And what this will do is, and part of the update, the biggest part of the update is that not only will it time align, which is one basic feature that you would expect from, the auto align, the first one, but this does also a spectral phase alignment. So what it will do is it will also correct frequency phase issues on different tracks throughout. And now the way that it does that, this is sort of interesting. They sort of describe it as like turning a screw, turning like a screw of the phase in order to kind of get it to align. This is sort of a strange thing because what you would have to do, in my mind, to do that would be you would have to delay certain frequencies by different amounts within the same sound. But I don't believe that that's the way it's actually being done. Whatever the case, the results don't sound like it's screwing with the phase. It actually sounds like it's really kind of tightening and bringing everything into focus. So we'll have a little look at it and see how well it does. I got bass with a bass amp and a drum set with two kick drum mics, snare top bottom, a mono overhead, a stereo overhead, stereo room, hi-hat track. And we'll kind of go through it and check it out. So when you get the thing, you have the display here that will display either the waveform or the phase correlation for any individual track that you select. That'll show up here. And I separated out the bass. What you generally do is you start with your first plugin. You don't want to do any processing prior to this. The only one thing I'm doing here is I have a DI track, so I'm creating a bass amp. And this will work for a bass amp sim as well. So if you do a simulation, some of them will compensate for the latency of the microphone positioning. Some don't. So in this particular case, it doesn't. So I can correct the phase post amp setting, right, which will compensate for the delay timing that it takes to actually get to the microphone. Sometimes that's part of the sound. Most of the time it causes too many problems, and you end up selecting one or the other. So I separated out the bass and amp here. Otherwise, it should do it on its own. You should set it on all tracks. Like I said, this is the one exception here where I'm making it this way, but otherwise you would do it first, do all of your processing after. That's the basic idea. You can turn off and on and off the actual processing, the alignment globally, just from this switch from any plugin. So it doesn't, so it's not just for this one plugin. I could do a bypass just on its own if I wanted to do it that way. This will do it across all of them. Now, what you see here in the display is the individual tracks. You see a little green bar here. Now, this is going to turn multicolor, green being perfectly in phase, not corrected, and then the other colors going up to red, which would be completely out of phase. And you're going to see it at different frequencies, so low frequency to high frequency. You're going to see the delay time, so how much it's moving the individual tracks. This is what Auto Align 1 did. It basically moved the timing earlier or later to get the best phase alignment, the best phase correlation between all of the microphones, and then you just roll with it. With this, you have some options, and I'll kind of go through it. You see that I have stereo overheads. These are tied together, but you can also unlink them. So if the microphones in your stereo recording need some phase alignment or have some phase issues just within itself, say with a spaced pair or something like that of overheads, you can do a correction of that by right-clicking on it and making the track mode multi-mono instead of multi-channel. I'm just going to leave it multi-channel for now. Same with the rooms. This can sometimes help to correct issues where it sounds like the kick is out of phase or it comes more out of one side than the other, that type of thing. It can help with stuff like that. All right, so we set up the process. There's 3 menus down here for resetting things. You can reset your assignments or your existing capture, and also get to the capture folder. There's some editing here, so I'll go through some of these features where you can move some things, set the overall mode, right, for multi-mono or multi-channel for stereo tracks, some grouping options, etc. And then the view shows a display. So you could show this display, right now it's set to milliseconds. You could show it in sample centimeters or inches. Okay, so let's hit play here. Doing a line, so it says, when you set it up, it says to start, click a line. Let's click a line and get to it. Here we go. So just a short bit there. I hit stop. Now it goes through the process of analyzing, and then you're going to see the color scheme change here. Okay, so now what you see here, I've set the snare top to be the key mic. So what that means is that all the timing gets aligned to this. So if I felt like I wanted to drive it, say, for example, from the M88, which is most likely the kick-in mic, then I could set that there just by right-clicking on it and say set that as the key time, and then it would move everything, and you could see how it makes everything move in a positive direction or a negative direction. So this ends up being an important part of the way that it sets the phase alignment, because it moves the timing to get it most phase aligned. And then what it does, you can see as it ripples through the frequency spectrum, it will shift the phase accordingly so that it aligns or phase aligns most effectively with everything else, with all of the other microphones. Okay, so we have that. Let's hit play and just see what the results are, and then we'll play around with a couple things. Okay, so you could hear huge difference. What I think makes this really different from the Auto Align 1 and the first version, and one of the reasons why I wasn't particularly a big fan of it, to be honest, was that what happens when you start to move all the other microphones is you shift a whole bunch of other stuff as well. And you can get things like you can start to collapse the sound field, the depth field, you start to smear the transients, you start to get other smearing type of issues. So you're kind of trading off one problem for another. I had devised a whole system where I don't align to a single track. I kind of keep my close mics unmoved, and then I move distant mics around until I get the best phase alignment. Overheads are almost always, because of the distance, like 180 out of phase with the snare drum. So that's just almost an automatic. And then it's just about aligning the left, right to each other and all of that. And that still preserves a certain sound field, but you still end up with a lot of the phase smearing in other frequency zones. And this comes out often in the clarity and the crispness of the cymbals, right? The focus and the imaging of the cymbals is a big one, because that one, it's very, very easy to just sort of make it a big smeared out mess. And they bleed through everything. It's even gating cleans up some of the stuff, but doesn't always sort of handle everything, because then you compromise other sounds. So here, the one thing where I would say I would work against this is aligning the room. Because then you lose the depth field. So let's just say that we wanted to take this and do something else with it. If I right-click on it, I now can make adjustments here where I move it later in time. So it's moved it 10 milliseconds earlier. So that's like over 10 feet or less than 10 feet, like 9 feet or so. In fact, if I view this in inches, I can see exactly 136 inches. That doesn't seem right. Yeah, is that like 12 feet or something? Okay, all right. Well, let me go back to milliseconds here. Maybe I'm thinking about this wrong. Right click here, and what I could do is if I move it, I can shift it later, and now it will adapt the timing, right, and the phase. It will kind of move it later in time to the next closest, next best phase alignment. But what I can do with this, which is sort of cool, is if I slide this up here, let me just raise the room mics here for a second, just so we can get the sense of the space of it. And if I right click here, I can go back to the original adjustment that's there, and I'm going to shift it backward. Just notice what happens with the depth field. Right, so now I get a slightly different tone for that going back and forth. I sort of liked one that was right in here. I think it's this one. Which would give me like just a bit more depth out of the room. So that's one area where I think I would just sort of slide it backward. Also, if I want to get a bit more, so let me just slide that back to there. Similar type of thing with the overheads, right? So if I feel like I want to get a little bit more height out of them, I could kind of move them back more to their natural position. And let's see. Right, where I can get like an open, more airy sound. So this is one of the things that really makes this usable, because I really have some options in terms of the actual sound that I can get from it, and it will still do the alignment correction. And because there are certain things, like the typical thing with overheads is to roll off low end, because there's almost no way by moving it around to get it to phase align to the kick drum. It just won't, just because the length of a 60 hertz waveform is like over 30 feet. So you're ending up in some kind of weird 35% phase off or something like that, which is impossible to align. Here it can kind of take care of that for you automatically, just by when you shift it later, it will actually shift these in timing. And this allows you to sort of play around with the sense of size and space and a bit of everything, so that it doesn't collapse the sound down into something that's just sort of feels bone dry and too tight. On the other side of it, if you have something that's perhaps recorded in too big of a space, this is a great way of kind of tightening it and pulling it together a little bit. So now you have something in a tighter space where you can move it back, make it feel like it's a bit bigger and more open by shifting it back, and still get the phase correction, or whatever combination of all these things. And so this takes this plugin to a whole other level, and makes all the difference in the world. So this spectral phase alignment ends up being what makes this the real deal, in my opinion. And this is a huge, in my opinion, evolution over Auto Align 1. that's the basics of it. There's more things that you can really get into in terms of editing. Those things are, kind of easy to figure out. From the basic perspective, this is all you really need to understand. This is the major feature I thought that was the big difference maker. And that is why it's Mixing with Mike's plugin of the week. SoundRadix Auto Align 2.